A somber anniversary. Bobby Kennedy assassinated 50 years ago. We'll look back at his life and how things may have been different had he lived. Then it is primary day in New Jersey and 7 other states. What happens today could tell us a lot about what will happen in November. Also, remember when Donald Trump called Ted Cruz Lion Ted and made fun of his wife? Said his father was linked to the JFK assassination. Now, even Cruz is in the tank for Trump when it comes to the Russia probe and pardoning oneself as president. What has become of the Grand Old Party? Evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. We'll also talk about the escalating debate over the president and the NFL and the anthem and all that. But I wanted to start the program tonight remembering what could have been and also how different it was. We begin this evening with the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, which, as I said, happened 50 years ago to the day at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. A Palestinian named Sirhan shot Kennedy after RFK won the California primary, and he died several hours later. Now, this is a part of the last speech that Kennedy ever delivered.
I thank all of you who made this possible this evening, all of the effort that you made, and all of the people whose names I haven't mentioned, but who did all of the work at the precinct level, who got out the vote, who did all of the effort, brought forth all of the effort that's required.
Kennedy was shot as he was going through the kitchen to leave the hotel. A busboy who was right there cradled Bobby as he lay there dying. Here's a busboy remembering that horrible night.
My first thought was to protect his head from the concrete. As soon as I put my hand down by his neck, I felt a stream of blood coming through my fingers. He asked me, "Is everybody okay?" Then I heard him say again, "Everything's gonna be okay."
Just 2 months before Kennedy was killed, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated as well. Kennedy gave one of the most famous and impactful speeches that night while standing on a pickup truck in Indianapolis. Riots were happening in places across the country. He was told not to speak to the crowd because of the fears of violence. He didn't listen, and he said this.
Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis, Tennessee. What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black.
He said that night he knew what they felt because his brother, too, was killed by a white man. There was riots, as I said, throughout the country that night, but they were not in Indianapolis. It ended peacefully after that speech. 60 days later, Bobby Kennedy was dead. 2,000 people attended the memorial service at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. Teddy delivered the eulogy.
Like it or not, we live in times of danger and uncertainty, but they are also more open to the creative energy of men than any other time in history. All of us will ultimately be judged, and as the years pass, we will surely judge ourselves on the effort we have contributed to building a new world society and the extent to which our ideals and goals have shaped that event.
He famously talked about judging his brother for who he was, and that's what we do tonight. Now, after that funeral, Bobby's body was taken by train from New York to Washington. It's estimated 1 million people lined the route, many in tears. None will ever forget it. They're of all shades, hues, ages, genders. 50 years ago, we look back at what Kennedy could have been and how we could use a man like him now. Here's Kennedy's biographer and MSNBC host Chris Matthews' take on this in a piece that he penned today. Quote, Bobby Kennedy, the leader we lost 50 years ago, is precisely the kind of leader we need today. Kennedy refused to exploit the country's ethnic divisions. His goal, to unite all working people. Tragically, Kennedy's career was cut short but he was the rare political leader determined to learn from his mistakes, especially the bad ones. I want to bring in our panel tonight. Richard Brodsky is a former Democratic New York State Assemblyman from Westchester, professor at NYU. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Conservative strategist Bill O'Reilly joins us, and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent as well. I heard today, even if it wasn't part of the programs, a news guy, a sports guy, a talk guy, 2 times, because callers brought it up and it wasn't part of it, all get choked up. And they immediately remembered exactly where they were as young men and how this one got them the most. And of the 3, 2 of them said, I didn't even call myself a Democrat or Republican, but Bobby was different.
I had worked for G. McCarthy against Bobby in the New Hampshire primary. I was late to that train. In retrospect, he was the man of the moment, and his personal qualities would have changed the country much for the good. The night he was killed was the night before my college graduation, and I turned off the TV and went to sleep right after, and now on to Chicago. And in the morning I was woken by a friend who said they shot him last night, and he's dying. The notion of losing John Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Medgar Evers, Bobby Kennedy, there was a culmination in that night that brought a sense of deep hopelessness that has never left the country. When the best and the brightest are cut down by assassination, it changed the world and the country forever, and we've never recovered.
You know, Dominic, there was a story, certainly from a generation ago, not now necessarily, but there'd be 3 photos in the black household. There'd be Jesus, there'd be Dr. King, and there'd be either Jack or Bobby. The Kennedys, especially for people of color, were the first time they saw a person of privilege that didn't look like them. They believed they cared about them.
No doubt about it, Richard. And Mr. Brodsky's point was dead on in terms of the leaders that he named that were assassinated. And when it comes to Mr. Kennedy here, imagine how the country, I'm thinking of him and the things that he's done, his outward reach, frankly, to poor people of color and poor white people.
In Appalachia.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so imagine his outreach with what we have now.
I was thinking about that today. I was thinking, and he was a flawed man. I mean, everybody's flawed. I mean, he started off, he was with McCarthy with the Red Scare. That's how he started. He was an aide there, but you could trace the evolution. America saw the personal pain that his family went through, and he would have ended Vietnam. Everybody knew it. We wouldn't have had Watergate. Maybe inevitably the distrust of government. Maybe we wouldn't be where we are now. It takes a certain person to be so driven to do that, as we've seen in the last 2 years. But I don't know. People hope for more, I just think, when they saw him. And they didn't have to, Bill, agree necessarily even with all the politics. But the idea was the government wasn't the enemy and they weren't out to screw you, you know, and that somebody actually is looking out for a little guy. And his aides, they told him, don't go to Appalachia. Why are you going there? And he said, you know, he didn't listen to him. He didn't listen to a lot of people on a lot of things, including on the political landscape. And there was no even guarantee he would have won the nomination, let alone even the general. But I am so shocked. I died the year before he died. I mean, I was born the year after he was killed. But there's never been anybody talked about like that in terms of how he was lost too soon, but what might have been.
I mean, I think also he's thought of as, and I vaguely remember when he was killed. I remember Martin Luther King when he was killed and watching that funeral. I was born in '63, so I was just 5 or so. But I think with Bobby Kennedy, he always struck me as the principled one out there. He was, whether you agree with him politically or not, he believed in what he believed and he was willing to fight for it.
And
there was
tough,
also,
too.
it was tough too. He also believed in the law very much. And I think he really believed in it and gave his life to it in several different capacities, whether it's Attorney General or on various committees or whatever. But there was also something I thought, and maybe I see it because I'm Catholic, but there's something deeply Catholic about him, that he saw there needed to be kindness and mercy, which is a word that Richard uses sometimes, in the public sphere. And I think he wanted to go out there and share that and be part of it. It was his faith and his belief together, and that made him quite special. It's who knows what would have been.
The idea, Andrew, of that train ride, I was watching that in documentaries, and it was supposed to take 4 hours, it took 8 hours. But the idea that people lined up, guys with hard hats, people of color, in tears, for a guy who wasn't even president, it's just so unfathomable today that we'd have that.
I don't know if I agree with that. I honestly don't. It obviously depends on the circumstance, depends on the individual, but I think we do still have that sense of shared compassion. If there's somebody significant to all of us who's taken from us, I suspect you would get a similar reaction. And
I think we're on different teams now. You know, and we always had partisanship. I'm not being Pollyannish, but I think that's part of the problem. You're divided into teams now.
We certainly are, but there are also things that bridge teams, and I think the common belief in the country does go beyond our individual team positions. And this is one of these hypotheticals that I hope we never have to try to prove or that we never see play out. But, you know, there are certainly people that didn't line up along the train tracks when Bobby's train came through. I still think that there are people out there who would generate the same kind of reaction. He's one of the big what ifs. It's hard to know what would have happened if he had lived.
The country's changed, Andrew, and it's changed in ways that Richard suggests. There is you can actually, I think, point to that rash of assassinations culminating in the Trump candidacy and the Trump victory, in the sense that there's been a growing alienation and anger in certain communities that has not been translated into the kind of positive politics of the 60s and 70s, but is now a politics of fear, anger, and
There's
division.
no question that you're right.
It's different now.
You're absolutely right about the change in politics. I'm just saying there are common themes that we all still share as Americans, and there are some things that would supersede that divide. And you know, political affiliations are one thing, but you know, I don't want to start going through hypothetical examples. What if this person or what if that person?
Right.
But I still believe we have that.
John
that
McCain
capacity.
was called a coward for and made fun of by the President of the United States.
It's a different circumstance,
That's-
Richard. It's an apples and oranges
There are
comparison.
no shared
It's an
values.
apples and
That-
orange
that's it.
comparison.
I think Bobby Kennedy's style of politics would work at this very moment in time. I think it would work again.
think it
Well,
would
the
too.
idea,
On
imagine,
whether he
Richard,
was on either side of
somebody
the
who
aisle.
says, you know, or believed and walked that of comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, coming from a person of privilege. You know,
I was there, and as Teddy said about his brother, don't make more of him in death than in life. He was a practiced, skilled, conventional pol. He refused to run against
with the sharpest elbows of anybody.
Johnson because he didn't think he could beat him. And once McCarthy weakened him, he jumped in. He was a human being, but and his political pluses and minuses were both very strong. In the end, I think you're right. There was something transformative about him because he could move and he could empathize.
When you watch that speech, that clip of when he spoke to the audience in Indianapolis, and it goes on, he reads a poem by Aeschylus that that pops to him, which is a beautiful thing. Drop by drop, the pain that is. I mean, it's an amazing poem. It's real. There's something very, very real that, even though he's a practiced politician, there was something more.
And that's the word, Dom, that I'm only going by clips, right? And I invite people to watch the longer version of this speech here. We didn't have time, but some of the best parts is when he relates as a human being to the senseless violence and losing his brother also to it. I believed him. when he said something. And he's not the only politician who's told the truth. We've had many of them that sit at this table that are good and decent people who say the truth. But he did it at great risk. I mean, to see
the mob,
right? And not only the fight against the mob, but his brother gunned down, and then him going into this as a personal. And I don't know. I just, and I will say, I know Republicans of a certain age will put Reagan on a pedestal that they have not seen since, and sometimes even before. But especially for Democrats of a certain age, Bobby Kennedy was something, even more than Jack, that they haven't seen before or since.
He was the real deal. I know you're pressed for time. He was the real deal. And think about this, Richard, and I'm just going to say it. We have politicians now in 2018 that do not go into black communities, period. And he went in after he was told don't do it. As you have pointed out in segment after segment, year after year, Indianapolis was one of the cities that did not burn after Dr. King was assassinated.
You couldn't see it there. He was in an overwhelmingly urban community.
He spoke from the heart, and it was sincere, and it comes across. And I venture to say that we would be a much more united country if he was still around.
Well, sadly, that's a segue from unified to division, because when we come back, usually we don't play sports this high, but a political football is being kicked around right now. That is President Trump disinvites the Eagles from the White House. Philadelphia mayor unloading on the president. We're going to show you that he said, and explain how the president has made a bad situation that much worse.